and virtually, we have other meetings to go to. So I won't waste any time before going straight into why we've come together this afternoon. I will start, of course, by introducing myself. As I said before, my name is Olayinka Bandeli. I'm the Chief of the Inclusive Industrialization Section at the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa in Lusaka, Zambia. This sub-regional office focuses on support to the Southern African region. I'm actually coming to moderate for you today on behalf of my director, Ms. Eunice Comprendo, who unfortunately is unwell. So I've stepped in at the last minute to moderate this session. Now, the way that I would like to proceed is that we have had a quite marvelous video presentation, which has been put together for this occasion, which actually sets the scene for the discussion of this plenary session 3 today, focusing on the digital transformation for effective development of a financing system in Africa. And of course, our partners are the Africa Development Bank, UNECA, and UNDP. Now, I will introduce each speaker in turn in terms of the panelists and the discussant as they speak. I will just take a little bit of an opportunity, as is my privilege, I suppose, as the moderator, just to say that we are recognizing an opportunity for digital transformation within our continent and globally. And we know that with fintech in the global arena, a lot of this great work has initiated in East Africa. We know that it's widely accepted that the innovations that occurred in the fintech space as partners attempted to address issues facing the unbanked and those at the bottom of the pyramid. And in the reality of that space, we find that innovation has been an opportunity to expand inclusion and access and affordability, which is crucial on the individual level, of course, but especially for our MSMEs, many of which are in the informal sector. So this is an opportunity for a great discussion to find out how we can push the envelope further, how we can use the digital space that we now have to actually redesign and restructure our financing system in Africa so that it's fit for purpose, so that the incentivization of that structure in terms of access, in terms of the cost of finance for our businesses is properly purposed. So this is an opportunity for this great kind of conversation, and I don't want to waste any time. We've had the introduction, we have some key questions which we may come back to, and there will be opportunities to interrogate the presentations that our panelists will present. So we're going to start with the first panelist on our panel today, and I hope everybody can hear me. I hope everybody can hear me, if I can get some indication of that, because I do from time to time have problems with my Wi-Fi and I don't want to be speaking to an empty room. Okay, thank you very much for that support. Okay, so we are now going to continue with our first panelist, Mr. Omar Cissé. I hope I've pronounced your name correctly. Mr. Cissé is the Chief Executive Officer of InTouch. And I will just give you a little bit of a bio introduction on Mr. Cissé. Please bear with me as I navigate the different portals that I have open. So Mr. Omar Cissé is a Senegalese businessman and an investor. He's interested in fintech and wants to develop the African entrepreneurship ecosystem. Mr. Cissé is the founder and CEO of InTouch, a startup in the fintech space that is located in Dakar. He was co-founder of Tiranga Capital, an investment fund that was launched to support small and medium-sized enterprises in Senegal. Mr. Cissé is best known for his strong strategy development skills and in-depth understanding of technology in the financial sector. He is highly regarded for his work in support of Senegalese SMEs. Mr. Césaire is originally a computer design engineer by training and graduated from École Supérieure Polytechnique in Dakar in 2000. He then went on to pursue an international MBA and various business management training courses. He founded 2SI, a company that specialized in software engineering, and managed this venture from 2005 to 2010. Mr. Césaire participated in launching the first ICT incubator, which is CTIC Dakar, which he managed until 2013. His ambition was to transform digital payments, which led to the founding of InTouch. The platform launched its first services in 2015. I would now like to turn the floor over to Mr. Césaire. And Mr. Césaire, if you could please restrict your intervention to 10 minutes. I will give you a little bit extra if required, but in lieu of the time, I would appreciate that. Thank you very much, Mr. Césaire.
Okay, thank you very much, moderator. Je vais le faire en français. Merci beaucoup et bonjour à tout le monde. Comme Madame la modératrice l'a dit, je dirige le groupe InTouch. InTouch, c'est une entreprise que j'ai lancée en 2015 depuis Dakar. Nous sommes plutôt spécialisés dans les moyens de paiement et les services digitaux. Peut-être vous raconter rapidement l'histoire de InTouch, parce que c'est venu, ça me permettrait peut-être de mieux élucider mes propos un peu plus tard. Vu mon expérience en accompagnement d'entreprises, dans l'incubation avec le fonds d'investissement que j'ai cofondé aussi au Sénégal, j'avais l'ambition de créer une franchise dans la distribution des services digitaux. Donc, je suis allé dans la banlieue de Dakar et j'ai créé un premier point. L'objectif de ce point, c'était de faire en sorte qu'à partir de cela, qu'on puisse faire tous les dépôts et retraits d'argent qui sont possibles, mais aussi faire du transfert d'argent, des paiements de factures d'eau, d'électricité, et vraiment offrir un point digital, mais sous forme de franchise de manière assez professionnelle. Parce que comme vous le savez, en Afrique, globalement, dans le monde, on parle d'un peu plus aujourd'hui de 3 milliards d'euros de transactions en mobile money par jour, 3 milliards. Et la moitié passe par l'Afrique. C'est l'Afrique l'Afrique subsaharienne fait plus de la moitié de transactions en mobile money, un peu plus de 1,5 milliard d'euros de transactions par jour. C'est énorme. Et pour moi, il y avait une opportunité à prendre parce que la plupart des transactions passent par ce point de vente. Quand on veut aujourd'hui faire du mobile money, il faut aller dans un point de vente déposer de l'argent, il faut aller dans un point de vente pour retirer de l'argent, et c'est là-bas aussi qu'on crée son compte. Mais malheureusement, pour le point de vente, il se retrouve avec une quinzaine d'acteurs dans chaque pays. Dans un pays comme le Sénégal, vous avez Orange Money, Yup, Wizall, Wave, etc. On se retrouve avec une quinzaine d'acteurs dans le mobile money, le transfert d'argent, le paiement de factures, etc. Et donc, le point de vente est obligé de signer avec chacun. Chacun lui donne un terminal. Rien qu'avec un opérateur téléphonique donne 3 téléphones au point de vente. Il lui donne un téléphone pour le dépôt et le retrait d'argent, un téléphone pour accepter du paiement et un téléphone pour faire du crédit téléphonique. Ce qui est ingérable. Quand on a 3 opérateurs téléphoniques, on se retrouve avec 9 téléphones à gérer, 9 comptes à gérer. C'est du prépaiement, c'est une quinzaine de contrats, c'est compliqué. Ce que nous avons fait, nous avons développé une solution qui permet aujourd'hui à ce marchand-là d'accepter tous les moyens de paiement, mais aussi de distribuer tous les services digitaux possibles. Quand vous allez dans un point InTouch, qu'on appelle un touch point, vous pouvez accéder à tous les services sur un seul mobile. Donc, le commerçant a une app qui est notre app, et à partir de cette app, il peut faire de l'Orange Money, il peut faire du Wizall, il peut faire du Yup, il peut faire tous les opérateurs qui sont présents sur le marché, il peut faire du Western Union, il peut vendre du crédit téléphonique, et donc on lui donne toute la panoplie de services qui sont disponibles dans le marché. Nous avons commencé par le Sénégal. Aujourd'hui, nous sommes dans 11 pays. Nous sommes en Côte d'Ivoire, au Mali, au Burkina, Guinée-Conakry, Kenya, Cameroun. Les 3 derniers pays que nous avons lancés sont le Nigeria, la Tanzanie et l'Ouganda. Et nous avons lancé le Mozambique la semaine dernière et j'ai quelques 400 collaborateurs aujourd'hui dans ces différents pays. Nous faisons passer par notre plateforme aujourd'hui, l'année dernière, nous avons fait passer 1 milliard d'euros de volume de transactions. Cette année, nous sommes à près de 1,5 milliard d'euros de volume de transactions dans les différents pays que nous couvrons. Donc, notre premier objectif, c'est d'accompagner ce commerçant qui aujourd'hui est au centre de la digitalisation des paiements et des transactions en Afrique. Et ce que nous essayons de faire, c'est d'être dans les zones les plus reculées, pour que nous aidions les populations à aujourd'hui avoir accès aux services digitaux. Je pense que ce qu'il est important de noter, c'est que, pour revenir au thème de ce jour, pendant le Covid, nous, on a vraiment senti une accélération de ce que nous proposions. Bien sûr, en avril 2019, la première des choses qu'on a ressenties, c'est une chute en 2 semaines verticale de nos chiffres parce que c'était la panique partout. Mais en 2 semaines plus tard, je n'ai jamais eu autant d'appels pour aujourd'hui digitaliser des paiements. Parce qu'il faut dire qu'au début, on ne le faisait que pour des petits commerçants. On en a 40 000 aujourd'hui. Mais entre-temps, avant le Covid, nous étions à une centaine de clients corporate parce que nous travaillons pour des acteurs comme Total, comme KFC, comme Bolloré, Air Sénégal, si vous achetez vos billets en ligne, les universités pour collecter des inscriptions. Avant le Covid, on était à un peu plus d'une centaine de clients sur le corporate. Et aujourd'hui, on est à un peu plus de 1500 clients qui utilisent notre solution du fait de l'accélération qui s'est faite pendant le Covid. Je n'ai jamais eu autant de facilité à convaincre les clients d'aller vers le digital. Parce qu'au début, on essaie, c'est nous qui allons faire la démarche en leur disant, vous avez besoin de paiement à distance, vous n'avez plus besoin que les clients se déplacent chez vous, vous pouvez les livrer s'ils payent déjà en avance, etc. Mais quand les gens ont senti qu'il y aurait des lockdowns et autres, le shift s'est fait tout seul et ce sont les gens qui sont venus vers nous. Et tout le monde a voulu digitaliser. C'est après cela qu'aujourd'hui, toutes les universités sont venues chez nous en nous disant, nous voulons digitaliser. Nous avons la plupart des universités et des... je vais trop vite. It's too fast for you, sorry. It's fast for the interpreters. Okay, I will speak slower. Okay, since I have only 10 minutes, I wanted to do everything. So okay. Donc c'est pendant cette période-là que vraiment toutes ces structures se sont dites, nous avons besoin de la digitalisation et nous les avons accompagnées. Et une des questions qui s'est posée, c'était de dire comment nous pouvions accompagner cette transformation qui était en train de se faire. Et pour nous, cette transformation-là se faisait à 2 niveaux. On a une transformation court-termiste, ce que je peux appeler vraiment court-termiste, hein, parce que nous avons accompagné certaines structures, nous avons accompagné Oxfam, nous avons accompagné UNICEF et d'autres organisations à aujourd'hui faire des transferts d'argent aux populations les plus défavorisées qui sont dans des zones inaccessibles parfois, en tout cas pour les banques et autres. Et ces agences venaient vers nous en nous disant, nous voulons faire dans telle zone, il n'y a pas de point où ces gens-là peuvent récupérer de l'argent, qu'est-ce que vous pouvez faire? Il nous arrivait d'aller dans des villages reculés, de trouver une boutique de quartier qui d'habitude ne vend que, en tout cas, ce qu'une épicerie vendait. Nous lui donnons un téléphone, nous lui mettons une app dessus et on lui dit maintenant, quand quelqu'un vient pour récupérer de l'argent, on souhaiterait que cette personne-là passe par vous pour le faire. Mais c'est aussi simple qu'un petit téléphone de 30 €, 50 €, une app qu'on a dessus, un préfinancement qu'il fait, il met 100 €, 200 € dessus et il peut payer. Et nous avons organisé des grossistes, ce que nous appelons c'est des super agents, qui organisent ces points de vente-là et les aident à récupérer de l'argent ou à remettre de l'argent dans le système. Et donc, c'est ainsi que nous avons aidé à débourser dans certains pays beaucoup de milliards de francs CFA. Nous avons accompagné des structures...
Apologies, Mr. Cizé. You have 90 seconds to conclude your intervention. Thank you very much.
Je me rends compte qu'effectivement, 10 minutes, c'est assez rapide. En tout cas, pour dire que je pense que la digitalisation s'est accélérée, mais est en train de se pérenniser dans les habitudes. Le seul appel que j'aurais à faire, je pense que nos États devraient suivre et se transformer. Mais chaque fois qu'on parle de projets digitaux pour nos États, malheureusement, on pense à des milliards à investir. Moi, j'ai la chance d'avoir, en tout cas, la plupart des organisations internationales qui sont ici. Je pense qu'on n'a pas besoin d'autant d'argent aujourd'hui pour digitaliser nos pays. Je donne un exemple très, très simple. Depuis que moi, je suis sorti de l'école, j'entends parler du projet de digitalisation de l'état civil au Sénégal. On a dépensé beaucoup de milliards dans ce projet-là, mais je vous assure que vous aurez donné à n'importe quel fintech, on nous aurait confié ce projet, on n'aurait demandé aucun franc à l'État, aucun, et on aurait mis en place un modèle dans la durée qui permettrait de digitaliser tout cela dans un cadre d'un partenariat public-privé. Et ce qu'il nous faut vraiment encourager, c'est le partenariat public-privé. Nous, aujourd'hui, on accompagne Mastercard Foundation au Sénégal sur un programme de création de 10 000 emplois en 3 ans. Nous avons déjà créé en 1 an plus de 2500 emplois. En 3 ans, nous créerons 10 000 emplois et nous le faisons avec des moyens très, très, très faibles. Et nous savons aller chercher l'argent. Donc, arrêtons de donner à l'État de l'argent pour digitaliser les services. L'État doit se transformer. L'État doit reposer sur les fintechs et les fintechs savent aujourd'hui où trouver l'argent. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup. And yes, I hope you're getting some applause physically in the session. I could hear the passion and enthusiasm in terms of what Mr. Cissé was communicating, but unfortunately, as the virtual moderator, I'm not able to benefit from the interpretation from French to English. I'm really relying on the organizers to ensure that when we get to the question and answer component of this session, that there will be some interpretation so that at least the virtual participants would be able to understand what is being asked and what the response is, because we actually have nearly 45 people participating virtually. This is critical. Thank you. I would now like to move on to our second presenter and welcome to Mr. Philippe Thigault. Mr. Philippe Thigault is a digital partnerships advisor and lead for Africa, leading the fourth industrial revolution at UNDP. He is an expert in technology, data, and public policy. He is the Senior Director for Africa for the Thunderbird School of Global Management, a technical advisor at the Presidency on Data and Open Government, and senior consultant for the UNDP's Regional Bureau for Africa. Mr. Thigault has earned recognition by Apolitical as one of the world's 100 most influential people in digital government for the year 2018. He is a member of the World Economic Forum, Regional Action Group for Africa. He is also an advisory board member of the World Economic Forum Global Shapers Nairobi Hub, Mercy's Corp AgriFin Initiative, and Swahili Pot Hub. He is also the chair of the board of Mtoto News, an award-winning digital platform based in Kenya in order to highlight the issues of children through technology. He was appointed as a regional ambassador for the Global Blockchain Business Council for Sub-Saharan Africa and was honored at the 50th anniversary of the Academy of Achievement as a delegate. Mr. Thigault, you have 10 minutes for your intervention. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I'll try to be very quick. I'll take a different approach than Cissé, right? Sorry, I'm trying to share my screen. Just taking from my various advice that I have, is basically to set the context of the period that we are in right now. And so as much as we're talking about digitization, digital transformation, we're in an era of a technological acceleration. Because for those who know, digitization really started in the third industrial revolution, where the world was getting a lot of, when the world was getting to adopt ICTs as a mode to automate a lot of the components that we had, and a lot of this was really around industry. Then later in this age, especially around the 90s and the 2000s, then we started seeing governments adopting digitalization, especially around the track of the World Summit on Information Society. So governments came really late into this game. So the technology revolution has always been driven by industry. The problem is that in the era of the fourth industrial revolution, which a lot of us date around 2010, 2011, is that we did not have enough time to sort of harness the third, which is really ICTs, into this weird age of where everything is interconnected and happening very fast. And so based on this issue of rapid accelerated growth amidst inequalities, because our context has always been unequal. We have now new technologies that are, whether it's Internet of Things, whether it's mobile, whether it's artificial intelligence, but they're not necessarily affecting industry. It's actually affecting every aspect of our lives. Worse off, it's reshaping government, education, healthcare, and business, which is really the driver of our economy. And so if we look at what is driving this, and I know we're talking about finance and fintech, it's internet and internet penetration that is basically driving this technology. And so even if you have a mobile phone, it's really what experience do you have around the gadget that you have around the internet? And when you look at digital around the world, per year we are having more people getting online. And so how do we ensure that as the world is moving towards being more connected, we are leveraging and harnessing these capabilities of connectivity for development, again, separating it from industry. And so the trends of this industrial revolution, and as the previous speaker has been focusing on, is really about digitalization. So everything is expressed in a digital format. Everything is integrated. Our economies are all integrated, whether local or international. Everything is smart. So how do we ensure that everything is smart? Virtual, that's why we are connecting virtually, but then being able to predict and prescribe because of risks. And quickly, in the interest of time, just focusing on two of these things. As you think about development financing in the era of the fourth industrial revolution, but also looking at the future of development, then a couple of things happen. Development is no longer local. There's a lot of disruptions, which means every solution of financing solutions we need to think through, need to anticipate disruption. The second thing is mobility. We can no longer do anything local. Whatever happens across borders is important. Then technology and how technology is integrated. And
Mr. Thigo, we have lost you a little bit.
Yes.
You...
Sorry. So just going back to, I can hear you. You can hear me?
Can you check your mic, please? We have lost you a little bit.
The mic is fine. Yes.
We can hear you. Please go ahead.
I'm okay. Exactly. I think it's your connection, moderator.
We hear you. It's maybe from the moderator. We hear you here in the room. It's maybe from the moderator.
Thank you. Okay. Quickly, is to look at then a couple of these trends. Is Africa, especially Africa, is extremely young. Our median age is 19.7. So how millennials interact, engage, develop is different. And we're seeing that 75% of our workforce in 2025 will be millennials. So then how do we factor this as we think through our development, right? So again, as I said, while it's enhancing rapid social transformation, it's also exacerbating the digital divide. In this case, it's actually an opportunity divide, especially in a world that is technology enhanced. So how is this happening? We are seeing technology companies that are generating billions of dollars, being the portfolio companies, are the ones that are now driving development and development financing, whether it's Gates, whether it's Facebook, whether it's Rockefeller. We are seeing new money coming into development financing. The second piece is around products and services. You've heard from the previous speaker, it's sometimes not about the money, it's about the product. Whether it's WhatsApp, and we're seeing how that's disrupting marketing, whether it's Safaricom and M-Pesa, how that's disrupting financial inclusion. And so this is what we're seeing. The second thing is changing the business of giving. And we're seeing a lot of online donation platforms, just people are financing development differently, almost democratizing the business of development financing. The fourth piece is it's actually even challenging how we do development. And so for me, the quick recommendations are that how we go towards post-COVID-19 development financing is we need to think how we harness these opportunities that is bringing to finance our development in an era of shrinking traditional development financing. And so just to quickly focus on this, we know that innovation is basically our anchor for this. So really as Africa, we want to focus on the third piece of it. The sustaining innovations are things that have been developed and that exist. The efficiency innovations are those that makes public service efficient. But then the market creating ones are the ones that create opportunity and new opportunities. So if you look at what M-Pesa is doing, it's looking at an untapped market, solving a development problem, but also creating jobs and opportunities downstream. You have agencies, you have now technologies that are built on top of M-Pesa that is about giving insurance, creating loans for people. And this is really it. So quickly, the current development progress is really focused on reducing political instability, basically building the governance institutions. And then at the end, looking at how you support entrepreneurship. What we are saying is that for Africa and moving forward post-COVID-19 is we need to flip the model to say that can we start by looking at the market, creating opportunities, supporting the entrepreneurship ecosystem, and then leveraging technology, creating inclusive growth, better regulate market to help in policy making. Then in that way, we strengthen public institutions and then we reduce political instability. I don't have to tell you through the continent of where young people are and their impatience. They don't want to wait for building public institutions. They want to be part of it and to create it from the bottom up. And so what are these key areas of investments? The previous speaker was almost saying don't give money to governments. I'm in a different opinion. I think everybody must be part of this.
Yes. Mr. Figo, you have 90 seconds, please, to conclude. Thank you.
No problem. So I'll stop at this one, and this is important. So I think for me, I'll stick to this. The areas of investment for me really is in the digital infrastructure. It's not about digitization. So how do we invest in data? Because artificial intelligence does not work without data. How do we invest in energy? Because we need to power this revolution. How do we invest in the internet? We are seeing the problems we are having here. How do we invest in capacity, skilling, upskilling of our people so that we always remain ahead and abreast of technology innovation? How do we create governance systems that govern technology, but also govern technologies? And then finally, how do we ensure that we have sustainable financing? So I'll end there. Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Mr. Thigo, for that intervention. There's a wealth of information that you've shared, and hopefully we will have an opportunity to come back and interrogate further as we get into the Q&A part of this session. Thank you very much. Just a couple of housekeeping elements. I've been informed, for those that didn't realize, as I didn't, that we have interpretation available. If you click on the globe at the bottom of the screen, you can choose English or French as your preferred, and Portuguese as your preferred option of interpretation. Thank you. Now we are going to move on to our third panelist, and I would like to give her an introduction, if you will bear with me, please. So welcome to Ms. Catherine Nwajiako Daha, who is the Director of Programs at the Overseas Development Institute in the UK. Ms. Nwajiako Daha is the Director, as I said, of the Politics and Governance Program. She has been widely acknowledged as an expert on conflict, fragility, and governance. She is also extremely knowledgeable about the role of business in fragile situations and holds 25 years of expertise within this field. She wants to bring a political lens to the development endeavor and to ensure that the context of developing countries are well understood and engaged with as complex issues. Prior to working for ODI, Catherine was a senior independent consultant in Paris and worked for the OECD for 5 years as the head of unit and head of the International Dialogue on Peace Building and State Building Secretariat. She co-authored the 2015 States of Fragility Report. She has previously worked for the Irish government and spent 8 years working as a researcher and a policy advisor for Oxfam and Accord. She has worked with several multilateral institutions such as the AFD, African Development Bank, and DANIDA. Ms. Nawajiako Daho holds an MA from the University of London, School of Oriental and African Studies, specializing on Africa, and a PhD in Politics and International Relations from Nuffield College at the University of Oxford. She is chair of the Bayelsa State Oil and Environmental Commission's Expert Working Group in Nigeria and a visiting research fellow at the Department of Politics and International Relations at Oxford. The floor is yours, Ms. Nawajako Daho, and you have 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that introduction. And I'm delighted to be here among this illustrious panel. I think what I am about to present comes very swiftly on the heels of Mr. Tigo, who presented last. In finishing his presentation, he spoke about the possibility of flipping the trajectory that would be supporters of development have tended to function with, which begins with the state and then sees enterprise and business as a latter afterthought. He is suggesting that we are in a moment now, given the rapidity of change, where we're going to see the arrow flip the other way, where the drive in terms of innovation, not just in the digital sector, but beyond, is really going to come from industry, and that the state and governance will become informed bottom up. I'd like to perhaps ask us to ponder this a little bit in my presentation. My perspective is one which tries to bring a political economy lens to these conversations. As was said in my bio, I do think the politics of things is critical to making sense of the way the wind will blow in terms of change, questions of who actually will benefit, who will get what from whatever policy changes emerge. I think those questions are really important for us in the development space, but also in considering the evolution that we're currently facing in terms of digitalization. I just want to share my screen here. Just 1 second. Okay. Sorry about that. I'm not able to find share my screen. Doesn't matter. I'll just ad lib. Well, not ad lib, but I'll just read from my presentation. So basically, what I want to say is that whilst on the one hand, the conversation so far is centered on what scope and what role fintech, other financing, access to finance is going to drive the possibilities that Africa is experiencing and are likely to increase in terms of increasing digital coverage, addressing the digital divide, addressing inclusion, and so on. I think it's important to also consider very carefully, and I think Mr. Cisse alluded to this, that it's fundamentally the inequality and the context of inequality and uneven penetration that we need to really very much bear in mind. We are in the context of a COVID pandemic, and we know that some 1/3 of the population benefiting from paid employment have lost employment during this period. We also know that this pandemic has particularly had a big impact on women in the workplace. We also know that other issues in terms of debt and reduction of fiscal space have been intensified during this period. But we also know that there are a number of innovations that have accelerated, and I won't go into any further detail to build on what Mr. Cisse has already elaborated on. But we do know also that whilst financing for accelerating digitalization is critical, we know that financing alone is not the only stumbling block. And in actual fact, in order to enable the digital transformation to be widespread and to enable us to address some of the fundamental problems of inequality and asymmetry, we need to ensure that we address ecosystem problems. So the whole of the ecosystem, not just the technical penetration of digital. And so I want to kind of focus on 3 pieces of research that the organization I currently work with, ODI, has done, which speak to this question of a closer examination of who gets what and who benefits within the digital transformation. So someone alluded to the work, the excellent and very innovative work that MasterCard is supporting. ODI has done some interesting research trying to actually track and document what impact greater digitalization is having on young people's lives. And clearly, in the context of COVID, we have seen that because of wider and more widespread digital uptake, young people, particularly in the gig economy, have also innovated massively. Given the youth bulge challenge that we face, the statistic of our median being the age of 19, the scope that digital can have in terms of addressing our employment challenges is huge. But once again, the research that we've done shows that whilst it's clear that young people are having increasing access to finance and innovating massively in the gig economy, using the emerging apps for and platforms that place for job placements and so on, we also know that access to that space is also creating new vulnerabilities, new intensifying divisions between rural and urban and so on. And so we need to also think about how we can use the finance that fintech enables to actually address some of those broader challenges of accompaniment and the wider skills challenges that that enable or disable young people from taking full advantage of the opportunities arising. That's one thing. My colleague, Mr. Tigo, also referred to the role of government, how to bring government into this conversation. Now, whilst we can, the work that we've been doing shows that whilst we can understand that it's industry really driving this charge, government does have a role to play, perhaps not in digitalizing, privates can do that, but in regulating the space in which the digitalization is taking place. Already beyond Africa, in countries with higher levels of development, this is a huge challenge. So how to ensure that governments have the capacity to start to address some of the regulation challenges that are going to arise, particularly in terms of, with respect to new currencies, cryptocurrencies, and so on, which can be as much of an opportunity as saddled with a number of risks, cybersecurity, data privacy being very important here. And then finally, I want to just end on this kind of thorny political economy question. Mr. Tigo suggested that our challenge is to ensure, the development challenge or the development, international development supporter challenge has been how to create stable states that are able to be drivers of development. I would see the question slightly differently. as one of creating states that are anchored in a relationship with their citizens. And I do think that we need to, in thinking about the pace of digitalization, the opportunities that fintech and other sources of finance bring in terms of driving this, we also need to think about how the relationships between citizens, between state and citizens, between rural and urban, are being shaped and recreated within this rapidly changing digital landscape. Because it as much as it can create opportunities for addressing inequities, given the uneven patterns of digital internet penetration and digitalization, it can also be a force for reinforcing divisions. We know, I mean, I come from a context, professional contexts which have been conflict affected and fragile. I think it was mentioned in my bio. And we know that the biggest challenge to development are challenges beyond the technical. The nature of the states that we are creating is really critical to reflect on. So I do think the moment we are in is very exciting.
Hello, I can hear that you're beginning to wind up, but I just want to let you know as well that you have about 60 seconds left. Thank you.
Okay, fantastic. Yes, I mean, I think we are in a very exciting moment. I love that video, and I think the presenters so far have outlined, the opportunities, but also risks that are worth considering. I would say one final thing. If we are to seriously build in an understanding of these risks into our policy making, we need to document and put an emphasis on creating a way of tracking transformation, not just of the products, or not just of this technical side, but for the social and political repercussions that emerge as we transform very rapidly. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that intervention. Very well received, and I hope that we will have enough time in the discussion part of this session to be able to interrogate further. We are very short on time. As you will all recall, we did actually start late. So in the interests of creating as much space, I am going to introduce the next speaker, and do forgive me if I shorten your bio, just allow for more time for your presentation in Q&A. So I'd like to introduce Mr. Stefan Nalim-Tambi, who is the Director of the Financial Sector Development Department at the African Development Bank. Mr. Nalim-Tambi has been such director since 2014, which was actually the creation. He oversees the divisions of financial inclusion and intermediation, capital markets development, and trade finance. He was formerly the coordinator of the Making Finance Work for Africa partnership, a platform for African governments, the private sector, and development partners to coordinate financial sector development interventions across the continent. Mr. Nalim-Tambi, I am giving you your 10 minutes. I would really hope that you may be able to save us a few minutes if you're so kind, but the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Moderator, and thank you for inviting me. I'll make sure I'll be shorter. I'll speak around 3 topics. First of all, I think we've all alluded to the fact that we need to obviously make sure that the infrastructure is sufficiently spread out across both the urban and the rural areas to make sure that everyone benefits from the access to digitization. That's the first point. And of course, at the FDB, we do work quite a lot on that with other partners. But it's crucial to make sure that if we want to speak about not having this divide between the rich and the poor, the rural and the urban, if people don't have access to the same commodities and facilities, clearly it won't happen. So that's part of the discussion. The second part I'd say is very much the policy and regulation, because I think it's extremely important that the policy and regulation is, let's say, conducive to making sure that it is industry-led. But fundamentally, the government has to be involved, and the government has to show that they're actually very much espousing the change. And part of that is not only through policy and regulation, it's also through action. So government to individual payments, G2P, P2P, et cetera, these types of trust building elements from the government side, I think are crucial for the individuals to actually believe in the digitization as having become, let's say, a staple in one's lives. And I mean, there's several examples across the continent of that. And we've seen how the private sector, as soon as the government has really shown, you know, with e-government as well, there's a lot of e-government going on, change. As soon as you have these transformations also initiated by the government, the private sector could actually even go deeper into transformation of the economy. So I think it's extremely important that we make sure that we do continue to have both government and private sector very much involved. I can speak to several projects that we've worked on interoperability, which, as we all know, interoperability is going to create a much cheaper environment to work in on the digital side. And when you do work on those interoperability projects, you actually engage with such a huge ecosystem, which of course varies from one country to the other. And this leads me to my third point, which is about the ecosystem. The ecosystem is the crucial part of this game. And the ecosystem involves public and private. The public sometimes creating or incentivizing through incubators, through accelerators. They're not all private sector driven. A lot of them are driven by the public sector, but fundamentally, they should be serving the private sector overall. So there's a huge amount of work that is done on the ecosystem. And at the bank, we're looking to definitely encourage the development of local platforms more and more, where you are sharing technologies, where you're not creating all these systems where you have to have 45 smartphones to be able to deliver with the different MNOs that are involved in the industry. So the thing is, it's a lot of dialogue. It's a lot of sometimes painful and tedious discussions, but the outcomes are worth the wait. And I think it's, of course, a new area for a lot of us, but it's very much a need for the governments to be extremely aware of the role of technology and the way it's going to transform their economies. And we have to keep working on that. So we're looking to actually support the development of these ecosystems in different countries. And we're actually working on a study right now, which will lead us to be working to facilitating between the public and the private sector in a lot of countries where we see there's a real dynamic, where we see that there's a real willingness to engage on the digital transformation. We'll be supporting them in reaching that goal. And of course, it will be very much linking public and private sector. So I don't think one should separate either the public from the public, the private and the public sector. I think one should, on the contrary, look to be working on PPPs as much as possible, and definitely making sure that the government also plays its role in digitizing its own way to engage with its citizens. There was reference at some point to the early stage entrepreneurs, the fintech industry. We at the bank have been very vocal. We're one of the first MDBs to be involved in supporting early stage entrepreneurs through venture capital. Back in 2016, we started. And we're very much working with some partners like the EIB through the Boost Africa program, for example. But we've also got our social impact fund that we've created that we're launching and running as of next year, which will be working very much on the peri-urban and rural area fintechs, because of course, usually it is very much urbanized. We know that. And also another area that we're looking to emphasize is the they have certain countries have a very conducive environment already. We want to make sure that we have more other countries joining that. But as I say, it's a very long-term discussion that has to take place at the government level first to make sure that the government understands how we can support the private sector that's already thriving locally to make it become a national priority versus it just becoming a priority for 2 or 3 industrial conglomerates. I think I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you very kindly, Mr. Nalatambi. for your intervention. That's much appreciated. I hope there was some applause in the room. I just need to check in before we turn to Q&A, whether we have another presentation. And Mr. Koura Sene, the CEO of Wave Senegal. Can I please get some indication from in the room, please? As I do not have a bio for Mr. Sene, I want to be sure that he's due to speak. Thank you.
Mrs. Korasen is not online. She has not been able to join online.
Okay, that's completely fine. Thank you very much for that indication. That actually means that we're in a position to open up the floor for about, I would imagine, approximately 20 minutes for Q&A to discuss in some detail the range of different perspectives that our panelists were able to bring to the session this afternoon. And normally I would summarize in a little bit of detail what the different colleagues presented, but in the interest of time, I want to open the floor directly to the audience, because I'm sure there'll be a range of questions that you will wish to bring out for further discussion. As we wait to see what we get virtually as well, I just want to position some of the questions that were posed as this session was developed to encourage interest. So questions around what adaptation of financial regulations will help finance innovation in Africa? What would be the next normal for digital transformation after COVID? And what opportunities are created and what are the challenges of digital transformation in Africa? These are some of the questions that our panelists were speaking to, and I would really encourage some further dialogue from the floor. So can I get some assistance in that regard in terms of anything from the floor? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I will be leading the Q&A from the floor, and then we hand back to you to distribute to the panelists. So we open the floor. Yes, Mr. Can you give him a mic, please? Here. Yeah.
Thank you so much. My name is Regan. I'm a researcher. My question to the panelists is on the digital. How can governments meaningfully tax the digital economy? Because where I come from in Uganda and Kenya, we have many people embracing the digital financial services through mainly mobile money. You've had M-Pesa that was birthed in Kenya. But we have a challenge because given that these governments have realized that people have embraced the digital financial services, they have now looked at those platforms to really mobilize resources, which is not bad, but how can they be meaningfully taxed? Because now after people realizing that these platforms are taxed heavily, they are rolling back to the traditional financial services of the banks and the likes and the MDIs. So yes, we are encouraging digital financial transformation, but how can governments meaningfully tax the digital economy going forward? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Waris. So here, the mic.
Thank you very much for a very interesting panel. I actually was going to also ask a question on taxation of the digital economy, so I will join my voice to Regan's for that. But I have also a very different perspective. I am concerned about the fact that the hubs for innovation and research on the African continent tend to be very much housed in public universities and public academia. And one of the weaknesses that I have seen in this entire system has been that there isn't funding being channeled into public universities for research and innovation to support the students, what tend to be fantastic ideas. And what I'm wondering is there space for PPPs on this? Is it happening in any part of the continent? And how would it work? But also, I think very importantly is how do we get that innovation to move from being a wonderful idea to then being that startup? I mean, this is the whole sort of value chain into innovation that I would like to hear about. Thank you.
Thank you. To Sir over there.
Good morning. My name is Isaías Rosa from Cape Verde. Now, since we're talking here about funding, about financing, and additional resources that we need in the continent to make sure that we overcome the current challenges, post-COVID challenges. My question has to do with the big ICT players, ICT companies, because we know that today, Facebook, Google, and Apple and other giants, ICT giants, they make a lot of money in our continent because their major asset is data, and we have people in the continent. We saw here that over 50% of the population, of the entire world population, does use social network. So my question, the question that I would like to address to the panelists has to do to the taxation of these big ICT companies. Since they are making a lot of money in the continent and they're not leaving much taxes in the continent, what would be the approach so that we can also collect taxes from these ICT giants, taking into account that indeed they are making a lot of money in the continent? Thank you very much.
To the Madam Job, please.
Thank you. Thank you for a very interesting panel. I think one of the impediments we're facing in Africa is the cost of broadband, which actually can hamper the whole innovative financing and mobile access to digital finance and mobile finance. We did a study at the ECA, and it was one of the key impediments, the key bottlenecks. The average normally it should be $1.5 for 1 GB. You see in Africa, for example, Equatorial Guinea, the cost is around 45.8, and Sao Tome is the same. I mean, it's actually really extremely high, and it prevents many of even the young startups, etc., to really access quality broadband data. So I think one of the policy implications is actually the need to review the process and to be able to support, especially the young, because in West Africa, we have many young entrepreneurs who face that challenges and stop them from growing their businesses and so on. So something has to be done. And now, if really we are to take and seize the, fully the opportunities inherent in this digital finance and digital. So I think it's important for us to come. What actions and what innovative action and really quick action should be taken for that? Yeah, that's them.
Thank you. We take 2 more questions and we go back to the panel. The man over there and then the Fatuli over there.
Okay, thank you. My name is Emandoya, a researcher from Cameroon. My question goes to Mr. Omar. I will ask it in French. Monsieur Omar, j'apprécie vraiment votre présentation sur les services innovants, notamment la digitalisation du système financier, avec les services comme ceux du mobile money. Sauf que j'ai quelques inquiétudes, notamment à travers déjà la régulation des 10 services qui sont effectués. Parce qu'à certains moments, des volumes importants de transactions sont faits via les services financiers mobiles, notamment les mobile money. Est-ce que ça ne va pas concourir à renforcer, par exemple, l'afflux illicite des capitaux, puisque ces services ne sont pas très souvent régulés. Autre chose, ces services sont généralement considérés comme des services pour des pauvres. Sauf que les principaux bénéficiaires sont généralement ceux qui sont situés dans les zones urbaines des différents pays. Par exemple, le développement de ces services doit être déjà précédé par une forte pénétration de la téléphonie mobile, puisque je suppose que c'est des services utilisés juste à travers un téléphone mobile et une carte SIM. Mais les zones, on va dire quoi, périphériques de nos régions souffrent souvent des problèmes de connexion et tout. Maintenant, qu'est-ce que vous pensez pour développer ces services, même dans l'arrière-pays des pays où vous êtes installés? Merci.
To Fatouli for 1 minute.
Thank you so much, and thanks for the presentations. Mine is not really a question, it's more of a commentary to share experience. I do agree with the discussion and the notion that infrastructure needs to be developed in order to promote digitalization. UNDP in South Africa, we did a study on the impact of COVID in South Africa. And one of the key things was the accessibility of technology. Those who had technology were able to go to school, whereas those who didn't have access to internet were not able to go to school. The same for business and so forth. So UNDP in South Africa has taken the initiative to have technology accessible to hard-to-reach places in rural areas using wide space technology. So basically that is linked to the availability of TV. Whereas not everyone has, most of the people actually had TV across South Africa. So they use wide space technology, TV wide space technology to make internet available to the poor and hard to reach places. So maybe that is something that we can learn from and see how to develop it for other places in Africa as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Moderator, I will be handing over to you, but I will be requesting that you give 2 minutes to panelists so they respond to the questions, so that we take a round of 2 other questions here before we close. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you. We also have a question which has come through Q&A from Mr. Christopher Alvin Mukaya, who is asking, how can the private sector embrace blockchain innovation for financial inclusion of the youth in Africa and hence create jobs and spur economic growth? So I now want to turn to our panelists. Panelists, with respect, we have 6 questions. We've been given 2 minutes to answer those 6 questions. Now, given that there are 4 of you, please can you try and choose from the 6 questions and make your intervention as brief as you can. If you can do it in 45 seconds, great. But can we start with Mr. Thigo? Thank you.
Okay, be very quick, so I'll try and balkanize them. So the first thing, the question everybody's talking about is agile governance, is how do you govern differently in the age of technology? So for me, trying to push through is not the issue. I think for me, it's how do you provide government with tools to govern within a digital economy, because they're just doing what they do ordinarily. So UNDP is developing playbooks for them to understand the language. We're creating spaces to co-create these responsive policies, and we're expanding our research capacity on that. Around Facebook, again, it's not about, this is their product. It's again creating a space where you can govern technology in an era where you do not have a space to engage. So a lot of the responses you see are violent, right? So Twitter in Nigeria being shut down and the rest. The idea is we need to evolve a new space where we recognize the holders of technology at Facebook. So how do we co-create that? For ATIA, I think the whole issue is we need to create commercialize these innovations and to think of African universities as knowledge enterprises, not just special learning. On the cost of data, I think let's develop the entire digital ecosystem and not just data. Thank you.
I was meaning 2 minutes, moderator, I was meaning 2 minutes per panelist, not 2 minutes for everyone. 2 minutes per panelist, so they have some time to elaborate.
Yes, I did understand that you meant 2 minutes, but I like to give 1 minute because I know that we'll go into 2 minutes and I won't need to come in. So if I miscommunicated that, I do correct myself now. So Mr. Cizère, I would like us to turn to you. There was a specific question that came directly to you, the penultimate question. So if we can come back to the room, Mr. Cizère, if you can try and limit yourself within the 1 to 2 minute spectrum. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Moderator. It is tricky to be able to answer to all these questions, but just to summarize, wanted to say that if it comes to fintechs, what is important to emphasize is that when it comes to fintechs, we are talking about financial and technology. So unfortunately, the regulation is more just emphasizing, is more focusing on the financial side, and we forget the technical side. And this drains the question that was asked by the floor related to the access. It's still a challenge, but it's not an issue related to the broadband or the capacity, but also it is related to the cost of these technologies. For example, I think that to help rural areas access to these services, we would need to for example, help companies like us access to USSD. But unfortunately, these technologies in some countries are so expensive that we cannot afford them. So unfortunately, we cannot reach areas in which you don't have 3G or 4G. And just to finish with one question, which is very important, that was asked related to the fact that money laundering is a big issue related to digital financing. It is a real issue. But fortunately, all the countries are now getting organized to be able to tackle that. And but I think that for years again, it will still be an issue, but it should not. It's a challenge we can overcome. We can overcome them because of the regulation being in place, and let's just work on it. Let's work on it, and we know that, for example, with In Touch, with the billion euros that we are working on, you may have some of them inside, but they might be very few compared to what we are doing, but we should reduce that to zero. Sorry, unfortunately, we don't have too much time for the other questions. Thanks you.
Thank you very much for that intervention, Mr. Cizère. If we can please move to Ms. Niwa Daho for her intervention. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll try and be brief and stick to 2 points, really. I think just a comment on the question raised about how to make universities equip them with as knowledge enterprises so that they are able to work with their students to facilitate the transformation of ideas actually into enterprises. I think there is so much work to be done in terms of bringing an alignment of academic research, intellectual space into a connection with the digital space. It's a conversation that is global, that we're having very much in our organization. And I use that as a segue into the next question, which is, that needs financing, that needs investment. It's also part of thinking beyond the direct support to entrepreneurs and so on, but thinking about the broader context in which they will be able to thrive. That leads me to the other question about how to ensure that the taxing of mobile money or platforms doesn't become an impediment and a disincentive pushing against that direction of travel. I mean, I don't think these questions are easy questions, but coalitions of stakeholders, public and private, particularly those with the greatest, involvement in this sector, that's the only way of fashioning a collective agreement on what kind of taxation, what kind of regulation. This is moving so fast, as we've heard, but without that collective agreement on thresholds, I think we'll always be coming up against the same issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that intervention. We're going to quickly move on to Mr. Nalentambi, if you could make your contribution to the questions posed. Thank you.
Sure, I'll be brief. First of all, on the hubs for innovation, I actually differ in the sense that I believe it's not about only universities. I actually believe that there's just school leavers that should be benefiting. And I actually believe in the model that, of course, part of it should be for the universities. We should be strengthening them, but we should also be developing through the incubators and accelerators on the continent, access for the people that have very good ideas to be coached and to be funded. And this is what is happening in a lot of countries. And it's very important to not only link it to the university world, but beyond that. That's one thing. So there is, and please understand when I'm mentioning this, it's not only about financing, it's about the non-financial services for people to actually become entrepreneurs. And entrepreneurs, not everyone is a born entrepreneur. We've got to be clear on that. And, people can have great ideas, but they're not necessarily very good entrepreneurs. But you can always try and learn that journey. You may not succeed. And that's why there's not very much private capital that joins very early on. But this is the whole point of the private sector and public sector approach, joint approach, because you should make sure that you can have the public sector support to enable you to actually stumble and then pick up again if need be in certain cases. So anyway, incubators and accelerators are important. Incubators more important than accelerators, because incubators is what we call the seed capital. This is really the capital at the beginning of your enterprise. When you're talking about acceleration, you're basically already 3 years down the line, and you have you've already got a track record and a balance sheet that's been working. So please do make sure that you think about that. But definitely, the universities are very much part of this. But we're way beyond universities, and in the rural areas, we should be setting up more incubators and accelerators to support local economy in the regions to develop. On the taxation issue, clearly, the big, the G20 has decided on that recently to make sure that they do pay some taxes. So of course, African governments have to take on that discussion with the G20. That'll take a few years, but of course it'll happen at some point. But that's the taxation, however, of transactions should continue. And on the contrary, never forget that through digitization, you're formalizing the informal. And of course, there'll be illicit financial flows, but the advantage of it is that we know we can trace those illicit financial flows. And some people have been caught because they've used digitization to move their money around. They have been caught through the digitization. So there is, of course, benefits and risks in digitization. On the blockchain, just one word, blockchain is very relevant to value chain digitization, because it's actually it's a closed circuit, and it's used in a lot of agriculture value chains, health value chains. And so please, blockchain will be and is already being used on the continent by several of the different sub-value chains in different sectors. It depends on the sectors you're working in. I think I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that intervention. I think that's all the panelists giving their feedback. Moderator in the space, do we have time for a second round? I'm just mindful that we have a colleague with us who will need to leave on time for another appointment. So that colleague may have to be excused, Mr. Thigo, but if we are able to continue, please advise. Thank you.
I think we're going to head it to you to do the conclusion, and if some of the panelists could make last words before you conclude. We excuse our friends here to not take another a round of questions as we are having another session with the youth, which is very important just after this one. And I'm using this opportunity to ask people that the next session with the youth will be going on during the lunchtime. So you can also grab your lunch and come here and assist on that session. Over to you, Madam Moderator.
Thank you very much. In the interest of time, I'm going to open the floor again to our panelists, our wonderful panelists who have given us a wealth of information to give us their concluding thoughts. If you can take just a minute or two with your last observations each. Thank you. Yes, if we could please start at the beginning. Mr. Cizé, you may go first. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. So just wanted to end with what I ended with during my presentation. It is related to the public-private partnership tool. It is very important that if we want to transform our countries, that we leverage on that. It looks like a theoretical topic, but I think that it could change definitely things if we really use this tool. This tool is very powerful. We do not need money to leverage on that, but we need our countries, our government to change their mindset on that. And for that, we need your help. I think that you can push, and it will be a big, big step for us to be able to transform digitally our continent. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Thigo has had to leave. He's given his apologies. So we'll move swiftly to Ms. Nawajayako Daho. Please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So just a few words, really. You know, if we are to truly be able to transform, we need to be able to know what the consequences are of the transformation that we're in and the challenges that is happening so quickly. So some of us have spoken about the importance of acknowledging the digital divide, the COVID context in which inequalities, asymmetries between people has become further entrenched. Another person referred to the fact that where there is no 4G, there is no access, and so on. And I think we need to build an understanding of who gains and who loses and who's left out as part and parcel of the way in which we think about how to accompany, how to shape and reinforce the ecosystem required for a digitalization that is inclusive. The challenge of not doing, the consequences of not doing so will be that we perhaps miss a trick in terms of some deeper challenges to do with relationships between people, between citizens, but also between states and their societies. I think I'll leave it at that.
Thank you so much for that intervention, very well received. If we can please move on to Mr. Nalatambe for his final thoughts. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I'll be extremely brief. Basically, it's here to stay. So what we're working on at the FDB is to make sure that the governments see the value of digitization even more so than today. And clearly, I think the infrastructure issue is crucial. And they have an important role to play there. Of course, the private sector can accompany there, but the private sector is really very much for the products and the developing of the facilities through the infrastructure having been put in place. So very much for continued work with the governments alongside the private sector. And we've tailored certain financing to be able to support the digital economy, which is a very new area for us all. And we've got to make sure that we continue that. And clearly also our education system has to follow as well to be able to help people, be it in the rural or in the urban areas, to be able to have access to the digital economy when they're learning. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much for those interventions from our panelists. If we could just give all of our panelists a virtual and a physical applause, please, for their contribution. Thank you very much. It's always interesting doing these hybrid events. I will just make a few comments really in closing, because I think everything that needed to be said in the context of this session's focus has really been covered in a great deal of depth in the limited time that we've had. But there were a few things that came to mind that I think is worth just summarizing around. And those are issues around the frameworks that we use in terms of driving digitalization for the benefit of financial development in Africa. And some of those issues were raised by our presenters around the architecture that is needed, maybe a flipping of the switch, if you like, in terms of the way that we think of the architecture. And these are issues around internet accessibility, capacity. One of our speakers spoke about agile governments and the way that governments are interacting with their citizens. But there were also some key messages that are really worth emphasizing around this whole issue of the relationship between the digital space, citizens, and governments, and how those relationships develop over time. And I think that we can't afford to lose track of those issues as we move forward. Sometimes digitalization is positioned as a panacea for everything that we need to do in Africa. But actually we know that this cannot be the case, and it isn't the case. In terms of inclusive industrialization, we know that there's so much that's required in terms of the infrastructure that we need, physical infrastructure. One of our guest stakeholders in the room was talking about the disparity in the cost of gigabyte downloading between Equatorial Guinea and the standard, which was just staggering. And if we don't pay attention to these issues, we will continue to talk about digitalization and the potential benefits, but the reality is that if we don't have enough resources going into the infrastructure, then we are at risk of those issues that was raised by one of our speakers about the rural, urban, digital divide. So that is critical. I won't take up any more of our time because I know time is precious. We started late. Maybe what we can think of as a takeaway, and I hope from this session, we will have some kind of indication of how we move from discussion and good ideas to pushing through our agencies and the spaces in which we work to make the change that we say we need to have. So that will be a next interesting step from this dialogue. Thank you to the panelists for your contribution. We really appreciate your time, effort in coming together to share your knowledge. And of course, thank you to our organizing team and to the presenters in the room as well. Thank you so much. And of course, to our stakeholders, you raised a number of critical questions. And I think we need to somehow capture and think about how do we answer those questions and how do we push forward the changes that we need to see in terms of our data. I could go on. This is a critical issue about safeguarding the value of our data, which is being used without payment, because we know that there's a moratorium on e-commerce, but there's a lot of work that governments need to do at the national level before we can come and negotiate at the international level in terms of what we want to see. But there are things that we can do even outside of these trade negotiations on e-commerce. So I will leave it there. Thank you so much. I've enjoyed this opportunity and I turn this back to the room. Thank you very much.